Third, one thing that has some historical roots, but has become, I think, more important in recent years in many countries, is to create, is to use some kind of a private body as the regulatory body. I'm thinking in Germany, there's something called the German Institute for Norms, which is an old institution regulating safety in industrial processes or industrial products, which has been given a mandate from the state to regulate certain kinds of things. And of course, the risk there is capture, right? That it's only representing the interests of, not capture, maybe it was created by, say, the industry that it's regulating, right? So there's a problem of a lack of separation from the regulatory bodies, which can be and sometimes is responded to, but is a difficulty of going too far in that line. An important example of this is the regulation of professions, which many of you I'm sure know about, in which the professions regulate themselves, and that may raise some questions about the relationship between the professions and the public or other groups that they're dealing with. Finally, I want to say a little bit about the model that I'm talking about, or that I would kind of push as something to particularly think about, is on the one hand a set of, as I was suggesting, procedural requirements for making policy that require transparency, hearings, reason giving, or justification of what you're doing, and on the other hand something rather odd that we have in the United States, and maybe you have in Peru because you've done a certain amount of copying from us, I think, and that is using political balance as a way to get impartiality, right? In this kind of weird situation that we have in our independent regulatory agencies like the Federal Communications Commission or the Federal Trade Commission, where written into the statute is a requirement that of the 5 people, only 3 can be from one political party, right? So you're forcing the political affiliations to be broad engaged, and they are also people appointed by the president with the ratification of the Senate, the majority of the Senate. So that may also bring in some cross-party requirement. And it's an interesting question to think about: when does the sort of contestation of partisan concerns lead to something that's closer to a more kind of impartial outcome? I don't think it always happens that way, but at the very least you're building into the system of regulation some amount of contestation in the hope that produces compromise or something that everybody can live with on the basis, going along, of course, with an expert staff beneath these people. So I think there's a range of interesting kind of alternatives that are trying to kind of respond to this, at least what I would see, this need or this kind of responsibility of the policymaking organizations in a democracy to the people in some broad sense. So I think, just to conclude, it's of course true that if you start introducing more accountable processes, these are going to be costly and time-consuming, and there's a lot of critics of the U.S. process for exactly that reason. Major rule making in the U.S. can take a lot of years to complete, and then you have court review following that. And I think that is a place, especially in the U.S., where we need to think about reform. But I don't want to let that sort of argument about mess, or about difficulty, undermine what I think is a very basic principle that administrative law needs to be concerned with effective democratic control of the administration, not just with the things they call in Europe administrative acts, not just with individual decisions and individual cases about whether you got your license or your merger was okay, but about the general policy under relatively open-ended statutes, and that democracies that are in the process of sort of consolidating themselves need to focus on that problem, but they can't just look and say, okay, we're going to take everything off the shelf from the US or from Western Europe and just necessarily put it in place. I would think particularly in Peru, you have particular questions about the role of the indigenous population in when their lives overlap with state regulatory and policy programs, and how to, in an effective way, integrate their interests into the decision-making process, in a process that's still controlled by the bureaucracy, and other issues that may particularly involve the urban poor in Lima and other places. Issues that are important in the U.S., but probably show up in not quite the same in the same way. So I just want to kind of leave you with the claim that I think policymaking accountability is really central to democratic legitimacy. That when I particularly looked at the cases of Hungary and Poland in the about 20 years after the change in regimes there, and came to the conclusion that they were, I called a book From Elections to Democracy, which was basically trying to make this point. Look, you have elections, you've got a free market, you're kind of getting going, but the way in which the executive, the bureaucracy, and this intersection with political appointees operates has not been worried about enough or thought about enough, and that there's a role for law. These are not just policies, these are places in which law, I think administrative law properly understood, can play a very big role, and that it's not just something you can expect to sort of evolve in a kind of nice way. Inevitably, it's something that people like your faculty or students need to kind of take on as a mandate or as something to be very much concerned with. So thank you very much. I leave you with that message. Thank you.